From the moment I understood who I was, I embraced it with pride. There was no hesitation, no confusion, just the overwhelming certainty that I was different. And that difference was something I would never apologize for. Growing up in a small town, surrounded by old-fashioned beliefs and strict religious teachings, I always felt like I didn't quite belong. My mother would talk about how she prayed for the day I would marry a godly man and start a family. My father would remind me of Bible verses about how a woman's place was to be a good wife, to bear children, and to be obedient. But every time I heard those words, something inside me rebelled. I didn't see the world the way they did. I didn't feel the things they expected me to feel. I didn't want the life they had planned for me. At first, I thought there was something wrong with me. I prayed, I begged God to make me normal, to take away the feelings that I knew would only disappoint my family. But the more I tried to change, the more I realized I didn't want to. This wasn't something I needed to be fixed from. This was who I was. By the time I was 16, I had fully embraced my identity. I wasn't just comfortable with it, I was ready to fight for it. I became an activist, a voice for those who couldn't speak up. I marched at rallies, I wrote articles, I stood in front of crowds and shouted at the top of my lungs that we deserved to be seen, heard, and accepted. But my parents didn't see it that way. When I finally told them, their reaction wasn't just disappointment, it was devastation. My mother sobbed as if I had died, clinging to my arm, begging me to pray about it. My father simply stood there, silent for a long time before shaking his head and saying, "You're lost, but God can bring you back." I had never felt more angry in my life. Lost? I wasn't lost. If anything, I had never been more certain of who I was. I shouted at them, told them they were the ones who were blind, that they were trapped in outdated beliefs and religious nonsense. I didn't need saving. I didn't need a God who couldn't accept me for who I was. That night, I packed my bags and left. I didn't look back. I found a new family, one that chose me for who I was, one that didn't ask me to change or pray away something that wasn't wrong to begin with. My friends became my home. We stood together, fought together, and refused to back down. We had each other. We didn't need anything else, and we knew exactly where the hate came from. Religion, it wasn't just something I walked away from, it was something I stood against. I had seen what it did to people like me, how it was used as a weapon, how preachers and religious leaders twisted words to make us feel dirty, unworthy, broken. But I wasn't broken, and I wouldn't let them tell me I was. By the time I turned 21, I was leading marches, speaking at major events, and gaining a following. People listened to me. I had spent years being silenced, but now I had a voice, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I had spent years running from the faith I was raised in, and I was certain I would never go back. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. It was late at night. The rally had been a huge success, one of the biggest we had ever organized. The energy was still buzzing in the air as I walked down the street with my friends, laughing, celebrating. I felt unstoppable. I was on top of the world. And then, it happened. A sharp, suffocating pain ripped through my chest. I froze, gasping, my fingers clawing at my shirt as if that would somehow stop the pain. My vision blurred. My legs trembled beneath me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I could hear my friends' voices, distant, panicked. Someone grabbed my arm. Another voice was shouting for help. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My knees buckled. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was my name being screamed. Then everything went silent. I expected to wake up in a hospital surrounded by bright lights, the beeping of monitors, and the concerned faces of my friends. I expected doctors rushing around, asking me questions, maybe even my mother standing by the door, praying over me despite everything. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in a hospital. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. I was in darkness, not just the kind of darkness you see when you close your eyes. This was something deeper, thicker. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of everything. No walls, no floor, no sky. Just an endless, suffocating black void stretching in every direction. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My feet felt like they were cemented in place, my arms heavy at my sides. A sudden panic gripped my chest as I realized I couldn't even hear my own breathing. It was like the world around me had swallowed every sound, leaving only the unbearable weight of silence. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was faint at first, distant, almost like the wind, but then it grew, closer, louder. The sound didn't come from any one direction. It came from everywhere, surrounding me, circling me. At first, I thought maybe it was my friends calling out to me. Maybe I was still unconscious, maybe this was all just a dream. But as the whispers became clearer, I realized they weren't calling my name. They were repeating my own words. I don't need God. I make my own truth. Love is love, no matter what. Every phrase I had ever spoken in defiance, every declaration I had made against religion was being thrown back at me, but distorted, twisted. The voices warped the words, stretching them into something almost unrecognizable, their tones mocking, taunting. I tried to speak, to tell them to stop, but my voice wouldn't come. Then I saw them. At first, they were just shadows, shifting and slithering through the void. But as they drew closer, their forms became clearer. They weren't human. Their limbs were too long, their faces stretched and hollow, their eyes empty and lifeless. They didn't walk. They moved in a way that made my stomach turn, gliding and twitching, like something was wrong with the way they existed. They weren't just watching me. They were waiting. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to move, to wake up, to escape. But my feet wouldn't move. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as the figures closed in. And then the whispers turned into laughter. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of laughter you hear when someone tells a joke. It was soft, sinister, knowing, like they understood something I didn't, like they had been waiting for me all along. Then, out of the darkness, a new sound rose. A voice, not like the whispers, not like the laughter. This voice was deep, powerful, and unshakable. It came from everywhere at once, like the very air around me had been filled with its presence. It didn't need to be loud. It was authority itself. You lived for yourself. You lived for your desires, but you never lived for the truth. The moment those words rang out, something hit me. Not physically, but deep in my soul. It was like a weight pressing down on my chest, forcing me to face something I had spent my whole life ignoring. The shadows around me shifted, reacting to the voice. Some of them backed away, hissing, while others crept closer, their fingers twitching, their forms trembling with anticipation. Then the ground beneath me, if there even was ground, opened up. I felt something pulling me downward. I didn't see flames, I didn't see fire, but I felt a cold terror unlike anything I had ever known. This wasn't just falling. This was being dragged into something worse. I clawed at the air, trying to hold on to anything, but there was nothing, just the overwhelming force pulling me deeper and deeper. And as I fell, the laughter grew louder. They had been waiting for me. I belonged here. I screamed, but the sound didn't escape. The darkness swallowed it whole, like it had swallowed everything else. This wasn't death. This was separation. From everything. From God forever. Then, just as I was about to be consumed by the void, a light exploded through the darkness. It wasn't just bright. It was blinding. The figures around me screeched, recoiling like the light itself was burning them. The force pulling me downward broke, and suddenly I could breathe again. And then, through the light, I saw him. Jesus. He wasn't just standing in the light, he was the light. It radiated from him, overwhelming, powerful, pure. It didn't just shine. It drove out the darkness, pushing it back, like it had no choice but to flee from him. The moment I looked at him, I felt something inside me shatter. I had spent my whole life denying him. I had cursed his name, rejected him, mocked everything he stood for. And yet, here he was, not to condemn me, but to save me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I understood what love really was. Not the kind of love I had fought for. Not the kind that was built on validation and acceptance. This was something else. This was pure, unshakable, unconditional. I collapsed to my knees, my entire body shaking. The weight of everything I had ever done, everything I had ever said, came crashing down on me, and for the first time in my life, I felt true sorrow. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "I'm sorry." Jesus stepped forward, and as he did, the darkness around me vanished. Everything I had believed, everything I had built my identity on, it had all been a lie. I had spent my life fighting against the very one who loved me most, and now, he was offering me a choice. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, at the one I had spent my entire life denying, rejecting, and mocking. And yet, he was standing before me, not with anger, not with judgment, but with love. The light surrounding him was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. It wasn't harsh or blinding, yet it overpowered the darkness completely, leaving no trace of the shadows that had tried to consume me. The figures that had tormented me were gone, fleeing as if his very presence had burned them away. I felt something inside me break. I had spent years convincing myself that he didn't exist, that faith was just a fairy tale, that religion was nothing more than a weapon used to control people. I had shouted it in protests. I had written it in articles. I had even turned it into my very identity. But now all of it was crumbling, because I had seen the truth with my own eyes. I had stood at the edge of hell, and he had saved me. Tears streamed down my face. My entire body trembled. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. His gaze held me, not with force, but with something I had never known before. True love. Not the kind of love I had fought for. Not the kind that depended on validation or acceptance or how others saw me. This love was pure. It saw every mistake, every wrong decision, every sin, and still, it reached out to me anyway. I wanted to speak, to tell him I was sorry, to beg for another chance. But before I could form the words, he did something that I never expected. He stepped forward, and in that single step, something inside me changed. The unbearable weight I had been carrying for years, the anger, the rebellion, the pride, the guilt, all of it lifted. It didn't just fade, it was removed, like he had reached inside me and taken it away. I gasped, my breath coming in short, shaking sobs. I felt exposed, as if every piece of me had been laid bare before him. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I had built my entire life fighting against him, but he had been fighting for me all along. I don't know how long I knelt there, crying, unable to do anything but feel the overwhelming presence of Jesus. Time didn't seem to exist in this place. I didn't know if a second had passed or 1,000 years. But then, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, it didn't echo through the air like thunder. It was gentle, and yet it held more power than anything I'd ever heard. You were never meant to be alone. The words hit me like a wave, crashing over me, filling me with something I couldn't describe. I had spent so many years fighting for myself, fighting to prove that I didn't need God, fighting to create my own truth. But deep down, I had always felt alone. Even when I was surrounded by friends, even when I was standing before thousands, speaking into a microphone, demanding that the world accept me, I had felt a void inside me that I could never explain. A space that no amount of activism, validation, or relationships had ever been able to fill. And now, in this moment, I understood why. I had been running from the only one who could fill it. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounded. I couldn't deny it anymore. The truth was right in front of me. Jesus was real, and all along I had been wrong. I lowered my head, my hands gripping the ground beneath me, not in fear, but in surrender. I had spent my life convincing myself that I didn't need him, that I was enough on my own, but I wasn't. I had seen what life without him looked like, and I never wanted to go back. With a shaking voice, I whispered the words that had been buried deep inside me for so long. "I'm sorry." The moment the words left my lips, something shifted. The light around me grew even brighter, wrapping around me like warmth on the coldest night. I felt weightless, like something had been lifted off my soul. The deep emptiness I had carried for so long, the loneliness, the anger, the endless need to prove myself, was gone. Jesus didn't move. He didn't say anything else. But I felt the answer in my heart. I had been forgiven, even after everything I had said, everything I had done, every time I had mocked him, turned people away from him, convinced others that he wasn't real. Even after all of it, he still wanted me. I sobbed, overwhelmed. For the first time in my life, I understood what grace really meant. It wasn't about deserving it. It wasn't about earning it. It was about him giving it freely, even to someone like me. Then, suddenly, everything faded. The light, the warmth, the weightlessness, it was all gone. I felt something pulling me backward. I gasped, struggling to hold on to the moment, to stay in the presence of the one who had just saved me. But no matter how hard I tried, I was being dragged away. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air. I opened my eyes, and suddenly I was back in my body. Fluorescent hospital lights burned above me. My ears were filled with the sound of machines beeping wildly, the rush of doctors and nurses shouting instructions. I could hear someone crying. I took a deep breath, my lungs burning, my entire body aching as if I had just been pulled from the edge of something final. Then I saw them, my parents. My mother was sobbing, her hands covering her face. My father sat frozen, his grip on my hand so tight that it felt like he was afraid I would disappear if he let go. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my body was weak. It took everything in me just to form a single sentence, but I knew exactly what I had to say. With a trembling voice, I whispered 2 words. You were right. My mother broke down completely. My father squeezed my hand even tighter. I had spent my life running from the truth, but now I had finally found it. The hospital room felt too small, too bright. The fluorescent lights overhead burned into my eyes, making me squint as I tried to adjust to reality, a reality that now felt so different from the one I had known before. I was alive. I had been gone, pulled into something beyond this world, but somehow I had come back. And now my heart pounded with the weight of what I had seen, of what I now knew. I looked to my mother, whose face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. My father sat next to her, gripping my hand so tightly I could barely feel my fingers. There was so much emotion in his eyes, relief, disbelief, maybe even something else, something I had never seen in him before. I swallowed, my throat dry, my entire body aching. It took every ounce of strength I had to whisper the words that had been pressing against my chest since I had woken up. You were right. My mother's head shot up instantly, her tear-streaked face filled with pure shock. My father's grip on my hand tightened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't saying it out of anger or sarcasm or resentment. I meant it. They had spent years praying for me, begging me to turn to God, to see the truth I had refused to acknowledge. I had called them brainwashed. I had accused them of being closed-minded, hateful, judgmental. I had stormed out of their lives, believing they were the ones who had abandoned me. But now I understood. They had never stopped fighting for me. Even when I cursed them, even when I refused to hear them, they had still prayed for me. I had spent my life believing I didn't need saving, but I did. And Jesus had given me that chance. I could see the way my mother was struggling to believe what she was hearing. Her lips trembled, as if she wanted to ask if she had heard me correctly. My father's jaw clenched, his face filled with so much emotion that he looked like he might break. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened? I opened my mouth. I wanted to tell them everything, to explain what I had seen, where I had gone, who I had met, but I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't even sure if I had the words. Instead, I just whispered, I saw him. My mother let out a shaky breath, pressing her hands over her lips, her eyes filling with fresh tears. My father simply closed his eyes, his head bowing down. I knew what they were thinking. They had been praying for this moment for years. The next few days in the hospital felt surreal. I had a cardiac episode, they said. No clear cause, no underlying condition that could explain it. The doctors were baffled. I had died, flatlined for over 3 minutes. By all logic, there should have been some kind of damage, some kind of lasting effect, but there wasn't. Physically, I was fine, but internally, I was completely different. I barely spoke to my friends when they visited. I saw the confusion in their faces when they looked at me, the way they expected me to snap back into who I was before, but I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. The things I had once fought for, the words I had shouted into microphones, the identity I had spent my life clinging to, it all felt empty now. Not because I suddenly thought people didn't deserve love or respect, but because I had realized that I had been fighting the wrong battle. For years I had tried to make the world accept me. But in doing so, I had rejected the one who had already loved me completely. The realization hit me harder than I was prepared for. How many people had I led astray? How many times had I convinced someone that God wasn't real, that faith was foolish, that Christianity was nothing more than a lie used to control people? How many people had I pushed away from Jesus, the very same Jesus who had saved me? I felt sick. I had spent years standing behind a podium, demanding that people listen to me, fighting for something I thought was freedom. But it was all a lie. I had been a slave to my own pride, my own desires, my own rebellion. And yet, despite everything, Jesus had still offered me mercy. It was more than I could comprehend. The first Sunday after I was discharged, my parents invited me to church. I had spent so many years refusing, laughing, rolling my eyes at them. But now I said yes. The moment I stepped inside, something inside me stirred. It wasn't the music or the people or the building itself. It was something deeper. It was familiar. Like a whisper in my soul, reminding me of what I had seen, what I had felt, what had saved me. For the first time, I didn't hear the pastor's words as something hateful or oppressive. I didn't hear them as rules meant to control me. I heard them as truth. I heard them as life. And when the call came, the moment when the pastor asked if there was anyone ready to surrender their life to Christ, I stood up. I walked to the front, and I fell to my knees. Tears poured down my face as I gave my life to Jesus. The journey after that wasn't easy. Walking away from the life I had built, the community I'd been a part of, the person I thought I was, it was painful. Some of my old friends never spoke to me again. Others called me a traitor, a hypocrite, a sellout. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their approval because I had his. The road ahead was long. There were still things I struggled to understand, things I had to unlearn, things I needed to rebuild. But now I had hope. I had truth. I had Jesus. And for the first time in my life, I was finally free.